Let me just start recording that. And also, like in this last part, what I'm basically doing is I'm going through the test review, and then I'm generally doing a lab exam sort of type thing that we go through the term list. But we've only had the heart so far and the blood vessels, the blood cells. And so I'm not going to do that tonight. We're just going to go through the few chapters we have. Because that finishes up our run before we then get to the brain and the nervous system. And that's a bit more, again, involved at that point. And then after that, we finish up. So as you work your way through the material, be very clear that that you want to understand what I'm trying to convey through the booklets and through the videos. And through the quizzes, and you want to understand as much as you can. But for the test knowledge that you need to know, it's only what's on the term list. And the term list, I mean, it's only what's on the test review. Sorry about that. And the test review, you find, oh, this is a different class. Hold on. This is not even your class. This is the class I'm taking. You see in my Canvas though, right? So there we go. So again, I showed it a few times before, but I want to just make sure everybody gets to print out the test review for the last test, which is, come on, baby. It's a little slow, this whole machine here. There we go, test review. Actually, I should be very kind to this computer. It's been doing a really good job. So that's where you find the test review. You click on it. It goes to a Dropbox file that you can download and upload or print out. And I want you to have that with you as we get through the test 3, because this is what's on the test. And then the term list 2 is what's on the test. Got that? Good. Now let's just dive right into it, because when we look at, we did blood last time, now we get into the immune system, and you see my slideshow, right? And when we get here into the immune system, let me see, there you go. When we get here into the immune system, look at that. I'm only making you memorize one thing for the test. And I think that is probably one of the more important pieces for us to understand. And that is that non-specific immunity is the first line of defense. Well, actually, the first line of defense is like the skin and the mucous membrane do not let things in. They can to let the things stay away from us. That's really the first line of defense. And once things come in, we have this reaction in the body that's non-specific, the non-specific immunity. So you're thinking on like you get poked with some stupid tack or something and you hurt yourself, and you have some of it penetrate through the epidermis and you start having a little bleeding and some weird stuff goes in, a little dirt maybe, and your system has to react to it and do something. So this is an immune system part that sees crap stuff that we don't want first and reacts to it in a non-selective manner. So this is not when we talk vaccinations. This is before all of that. And so a few things that happen with that, in generally, that triggers an inflammatory response. So you want to know the inflammation is sort of the first line of defense. So inflammation is actually a good thing. It's just a pain in the butt because it hurts, because you have vasodilation, and that is when blood vessels dilate and get bigger, and they bring more fluid to the area to flush this bad stuff out, but also to produce heat through that, bring heat to the area and redness, and try to neutralize all the foreign particles with all these different manners. And then those blood vessels also become leaky, and that creates swelling and pain. And so you feel that. You feel a swollen something when you hurt yourself a little bit. You know, the bigger, the more swollen it is. And so those are these cardinal signs of inflammation that we want to know. And so I want you to understand that process a little bit. And then when we get to specific immunity, I really just am talking about, in terms of what you need for the test, that the pathogens that have previously been encountered sensitize our immune system. And if they get attacked again, that they can selectively fight the immune system, or fight the pathogen. The immune system can fight the pathogen then that way very selectively. And that's down in here pretty much what I describe in here. And so this is, sorry about that. My text is going off here. So this is, hello, bye-bye. This is where, it gets into what we're talking about with COVID and all that. If we get exposed to COVID, our system, may be fine to handle it. If our system is strong, is young, potentially, that depends on what virus it is. But is like this virus, like if you have a good vitamin D level, you have a good response, better response to it if you're fit and so forth. So different immune systems can react differently to an invader like COVID. But ultimately, what we want to do, and I think this is one of the best medical advances that modern medicine really produced, is this fact that we can so-called prime an immune system with a vaccine, with something that is not natural necessarily, that's not acquired that way, but it's artificially given to us. And what we do is, though, we teach the immune system with that substance. And I think that's why it is so cool, because in some ways we actually really work with our own nature doing it. The challenge comes to, how do we talk to people about it? What else is in there? Is there some problems with doing that, et cetera, et cetera? But even with the Johnson & Johnson, if somebody's on birth control, the fact that we can have, a stroke from that is much higher than like the vaccine itself. And so they seem to be pretty safe. So a lot of it is just a lot of chatter that we need to figure out what's what, and everybody has their own understanding with things. And, I don't want to influence anybody, but what I do believe strongly is that function of a substance that we get makes our own immune system work more efficiently, because we prime it so it knows what to do with when it gets attacked again. I think that is really cool. That is really some cool stuff. And it makes us understand the system much better. So that's that antibody antigen sort of situation. Do you guys have a pretty okay handle on that?
Yeah, this is fine. I think I just really find it difficult to remember all of the different immune, what are they called? Like different cells.
Like the B cells and the T cells and the monocytes and the blobocytes and all that. So with the blood, you need to know those recognizing ones, right? That's in the blood chapter, where I have you do like what the monocytes, the eosinophils. And so you just want to have one little understanding of each. When we get to the immune system that we describe here, we get to the specific, we talk about the lymphocytes, the B and the T cells. And then is that where it's like, what does a B helper cell do and so forth? Is that where it gets a little bit too much?
Yeah, I mean, even like from the blood thing, I think like I learned it for that, but then there's so many of them, and now we get to the B and T cells and the differentiation of like where each comes from, and then there's like the T helper and the blah 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 and
killer and the suppressor. Yeah, I feel you, because I always it gets overwhelming for me too. And so I try to, bring it as well as I can into it. What I think interesting is if we look at where we have those. So we look at a few things. We look at the MHC. So that's a recognizing thing, right? That we have our cells have its own surface protein that tells this is our cell, don't bother me, leave me alone. So that's one important piece, right? And then we have this APC, antigen presenting cell situation. So this is also kind of cool because we get the macrophages that are resident in tissues. So these are monocytes that go to tissues then. And they are in the tissues there, and they're sitting there and they eat some foreign stuff because they're macrophages. They eat crap, right? And they realize, oh my God, this is some bad shit. And so they then present that on the outside of the cell. And the T helper can recognize that, but also recognizes that the macrophages is one of us. And so at that point, then the T helper becomes involved. And so this macrophage, this monocyte in tissue, is sort of the link in between that specific and non-specific immunity. And then once that, you know, and the cytokines, don't worry about all of that stuff. Just get the big picture. And then once that T helper cells is activated, then my basic understanding at that point that I take away, you know, when I don't read the stuff for a long time, is that then they basically, that T helper cells tells the T killer cell, the cytotoxic one, that can individually go hunt down infected cells and kill them with gunshot wounds like perforins. Those are like little gunshots, basically. And it also activates the B cells. And the B cells are the ones that make antibodies. And the antibodies then float around in the system. And so the vaccine that we're working on, that we're all in the news, everything about, that will activate the function of making a lot of B cells and making a lot of antibodies. Also, if we don't have that, we can get artificial antibodies into our system. Like if you have a snake bite, you get an antivenom. And that's the same thing with the antibodies we can give for COVID. And now they are doing that more and more, where people don't have a vaccine, they get sick, and they immediately put them in an infusion of antibody transfers, because then you don't need to go through the system of actually your body learning how to make it themselves. You just give it to the body. So the product of the B cells is given to the body, and so it can utilize that for a period. But of course, it's not going to last for a long time because your body does not know how to make it, but your body will not have a reaction to it because you have these antibodies that can do a few things. The antibodies can mask a dangerous part, the antigen, basically. It can cover it up so the immune system is not able to react to it. It neutralizes it. It makes it non-functioning, basically. It can then also clump together different aggregates with different, it can clump it out. So that's agglutination, and it can precipitate it out of solution. So it can float to the side and you can get rid of it. So basically, and so those are things that then those antibodies can do with the virus that we have, with the antigen that we have. And then I think the next one that we want to kind of know, or the last one that you want to know, is the suppressors. I don't even know where I got the suppressor here. T killer. And then the suppressor cells are the ones that diminish the immune response once we don't need to worry about it no more. So it's a modulation thing.
So then B cells are not the antibodies. They make the antibodies.
The B cells make the antibodies. So you have two types of B cells. You have memory B cells that have the memory of how to make the antibodies. They are going to stay in your system. Even after you got the chicken pox and you're exposed, you don't even notice it anymore because you have those antibodies. And then we have the plasma cells, and they are producing they will heavily produce antibodies once you get an exposure again. And those are known as plasma cells. But yeah, then they spew out those antibodies, and the antibodies float around in the fluid. And they do all these different things that we just talked about. Is that making it a little clearer? We got to make the story as concise as we can get it with detail in it that hopefully, you know, it will come back when you touch it again. But I think this is the level of amount of story that if you know that level, you can listen to a lot of people talking and it makes sense what they're saying, you know. Okay, it is a little complicated, but with that, let's move right on to the, well, anybody else have a question, just interrupt me. Do not have to hold up pants or anything because I can't see all of you. I have my little video slide out, but feel free to just interrupt, and if I don't hear from you, I'll just keep moving forward with what we're talking about. So when we talk about the next chapter, that's the endocrine system. And the endocrine system controls and coordinates functions of cells and organs throughout the body. I want you to know that. It's composed of glands that secrete chemical signals, which are hormones, into the bloodstream or the lymph. And then those hormones circulate around the whole body. And so this is different than the nervous system. But the nervous system is, well, it's the same in the fact that the hormones make, that the glands make chemicals, put them in the bloodstream, and then those chemicals attach themselves to a cell, the target cell, they call that. And then the target, who has a receptor for that hormone, will have a reaction because the receptor will create the reaction. So if you don't have a receptor on the target for that specific hormone, nothing's going to happen. You feel that, for example, when you have lunch and it's, let's say, a high sugar lunch, and then by 2 o'clock, your brain feels very tired. Part of that is that the brain cells don't have receptors for sugar to go in. And so if you raise a lot of blood sugar in the system, and it doesn't have receptors for insulin, all the cells have receptors for insulin, but not the brain. The blood sugar will drop dramatically, and all the cells get sugar in them, but not the brain. And what does sugar do? It makes ATP. It makes us be able to think and alert and use ATP. And then the brain is a little laxing of that, and so we get tired. And so that's why it's a receptor question. It ought to be the hormone question. The hormone tells us what it does, but if there's no receptors, nothing's going to happen. And you got a similar situation in the nerve, except in the nerve, you have a cable that goes from the brain or the spinal cord to the organ, let's say a muscle, and releases a chemical right there onto the muscle cell, which has a receptor for that chemical. And then we don't call it a hormone. At that point, we call it a neurotransmitter. And so the hormones go through the bloodstream, and that's very nice and slow. It's a freeway system. It's good, but it's slow. But the thing is, those functions that are regulated by the endocrine system are sort of slow, but they last long. In the nervous system, the chemicals don't go through a blood system. They get released right there at the, let's say, muscle cell, if we want to stimulate a muscle. And so they don't have to travel far. So these effects are very fast, but they're very brief. They're not long. And so you can see that when you can feel that when you are on the freeway and somehow you have to swerve out of the lane or something, and it's a little dangerous, and you do react the right way, hopefully, but it's fast and swift and done with. That's the nervous system. And then if it's really a bad one, after about a half a minute, you get the jitters because it's like, oh my Lord, what happened here? And it's like too much coffee. And that's the endocrine system. So you feel the adrenaline going through the system, because what happens is the brain, the nervous system attaches to the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland secretes adrenaline into the bloodstream, and then that goes onto the organs and onto the cells that make you feel jittery, and has receptors there, and you end up feeling jittery. So it's the longer, and it lasts longer than the swerving out. So you can feel that difference. All right, so that's so far that, and then let's go to the next page. And on the next page, I talk about all the glands. And again, if you have questions, just interrupt me. So when we talk about the glands of the pituitary, this is the pituitary gland. Well, this is the pituitary gland. This is the hypothalamus. We used to think that the pituitary gland was the king of glands. Well, it is kind of the king of glands, but it's has got a master, and the master is the hypothalamus, which is part of the brain. And the reason why we call it the king of glands, because look at how many different hormones come out of this pituitary, which sits right in the brain. It's right here in the brain on the bottom there. It's attached. It sits in the sella turcica. Oh yeah, you guys studied the skull. It's in the sella turcica. So it's got two lobes to it. It's got a posterior lobe that's known as the neurohypophysis. And then it's got an anterior lobe, and that's the adenohypophysis, or anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. You can also call it that. The hypophysis is an old name for pituitary. So they still use it sometimes. The neurohypophysis, the posterior lobe, is actually nerve endings that are nerves that come from the hypothalamus, and they go down to the pituitary gland, and there they release hormones. And they release two hormones. They release ADH and oxytocin. It's not even on the list. That means you want to know about it, but you don't have to study that one for the test. But you remember two hormones come out of the posterior pituitary. It's basically nerve endings from the hypothalamus. The anterior lobe of the pituitary releases a lot of different hormones that stimulate either different glands or work themselves, like growth hormone or prolactin or so, work directly. But they are controlled by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus basically has hormones as well that it releases onto the anterior pituitary into the bloodstream. There's a small little bloodstream here, the hypophyseal portal system, that brings those hormones right to the pituitary. And those hormones are basically telling the pituitary, release this hormone or don't release this hormone. And so they put them into two categories. The on switch is the releasing or the liberating hormone, the liberin, and the stopping hormone, don't release this, is the statin or inhibiting hormone. And so I want you to understand that that's why the hypothalamus is the master gland, because it controls the pituitary gland, which then secretes a lot of hormones.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you said that the hypothalamus is sending the inhibitor or the release.
Right.
So which okay, and then the two different parts of the pituitary gland send out their different hormones. Which hormones do the hypothalamus send to the
they're called like growth hormone inhibiting hormone or growth hormone releasing hormone.
Okay.
So they have all these different prolactin inhibiting hormone, prolactin releasing hormone. They have all these different hormone names, and then inhibiting or stimulating. Yeah, it gets kind of involved when you list them, all of them. And so that's, yeah, and it's kind of cool the way it works though. And then these two hormones in the back, they just go directly down, the nerves go down, and then this is basically nervous structures, not really glandular structure then. And those are basically, at the end of the day, neurotransmitters that get released into the bloodstream, so they become hormones that way.
I don't mean to be like, I feel like this was in the text and things, but
no, don't, just ask.
Okay. Are the hormones stored in the hypothalamus, or are they in the pituitary?
No, these hormones here, the oxytocin and the antidiuretic hormone, are stored in the hypothalamus and released by the pituitary gland. But we're more talking about where they're made versus released. So they're made here, and then they get transported down. When you look at the nerve, all the neurotransmitters are made by the cell body, and then they get transported to the endpoint of the nerve where they get released, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. It doesn't seem that efficient in that respect, but that's how it works. So the storage might be a difficult question, but I would assume a lot of it is stored here as it's made, and then it gets transported down and then secreted or released in this area.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good. And then keep interrupting me, please. It's good, and it's interactive. Oh, here, this is where it sits. So this is actually a nice picture, I find. This is just, when we then look at the pineal gland, I think that's the next one I got here. Where's the pineal gland? Here we go. Pineal gland. So basically what I want you to know about these different glands, I kind of want you to get a main point of these glands. So in the pineal gland, I want you to understand they releases melatonin, and melatonin helps with sleep. It is actually also a good antioxidant. So I did on a list of things to do that was from the functional medical doctors clinic, Andrew Weil school, and melatonin was one of the things to take for fighting COVID because it's a good antioxidant. So, but you want to be careful if you take melatonin for sleep, because if you take it every night, then it's actually a hormone that we release ourselves. The body thinks, oh, I don't need to make this. It's already in the bloodstream. So it stops making it. And so you want to, like, if you take melatonin to fall asleep, it's not a bad one to take because it's natural, but you want to sort of take it and then have some breaks and not always take it. That's what they say. So that's a little point there. And then the thyroid gland is in the front of your throat, underneath the larynx, which is sort of the bumpy thing. On the guys, you see the Adam's apple, and the ladies, you got to poke a little bit. And underneath there is the thyroid gland, and that has to do with the rate of metabolism. Metabolism are the chemical reactions in our body. So it's like how you can see it in people that have a higher functioning or a lower functioning. They're really hyper, or they're like sort of sluggish. So that's that. And then we also have cells here. We have cells that are around here, the follicles, and the follicles is where we have the thyroid hormone. But then we also have parafollicular cells next to the follicle, the round thing, and those actually secrete calcitonin. And calcitonin is a hormone that brings the calcium level downward. It decreases calcium level in the blood. And so you have an opposing hormone. So some of the glands you have are opposing hormones, or you have opposing functioning hormones, so you can keep a balance in, like in the bloodstream, we want a balance of calcium ions. And so you're going to have a hormone that makes the calcium level go up a little bit because we don't have enough. And then you have a hormone that drops it a little bit because we have too much. And so we end up having a nice negative feedback loop for calcium in the blood. And so we have the calcitonin that, the way I look at it, it says it, I remember it by, it tones the blood calcium level down. So what it does, it takes blood calcium out of the blood and puts it in a bone. It decreases the uptake in the intestine, and it also decreases the reabsorption in the urine, so we pee more out of it. And so with all these things, then the calcium levels will fall downward a little bit, and our blood is not too hypercalcemic. It's probably the word hypercalcemic. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's how I would make it up if I would have to make it up. And then the opposing hormone to that is the parathyroid hormone. So when you actually take that gland here in the front and you turn it around, you see it like this. And in the back, you got these little dots, and these little dots are the parathyroid glands. And they secrete parathyroid hormone. And that does the opposite to calcitonin. It brings the blood calcium level up. So if it's too low, we're going to increase release from the bone. We're going to take more calcium up from the food. And we're going to make sure we take all the calcium that we will pee out back into the bloodstream, and we raise the blood calcium level that way. So that's what those two hormones do. So parafollicular cells secrete calcitonin, and calcitonin tones the blood calcium level down. I always need that in the morning, so I remember which does which. And then if I know that, but if I know what calcitonin does, I know what parathyroid does, hormone does. Good, and that brings us to the adrenal gland. And the adrenal gland has two main parts to it. It has a cortex, and the cortex is the outside shell of it. So this is the cortex here, the outside shell. And the cortex has multiple layers. And the layers have names. They are zones. Zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. And then on the inside, we have a medulla. And so when we look at, I'm not going to make you study the different names, but I want you to kind of get the understanding of the hormones that come out of it. So we have aldosterone that comes out of it, and aldosterone causes sodium to be reabsorbed by the kidneys. And what that does, if we take sodium out of the blood, one concept we want to understand in the body is that water follows salt. And so water always follows our sodium. You can see that if you slice a tomato and you put a little salt on top, all of a sudden the salt is not a crystal anymore. It's a blob. It's a drop of water because it pulls the water out of the tomato. The salt does. And so when aldosterone causes sodium to be reabsorbed by the kidneys, that helps us bring more water back into the bloodstream. So water follows salt. Then we also have cortisol that comes out of it, the glucocorticoids. And cortisol is a long-term physical stress hormone that makes sure the cell's glucose level is intact. So it's a stress hormone. It's a decreased inflammation hormone. We give it to people and inject it in joints as in cortisone if there is an inflammatory response in the joints. So that's our natural stress hormone that way, long-term stress. And then we also get the androgens, and the androgens are testosterones, masculizing hormones. Basically is testosterone. And that's a place where both the male and the female body gets testosterone from. So that's good. That's an anabolic. That's a build-up hormone. So that's good. And then the adrenal medulla is where we have epinephrine and norepinephrine, and that's basically, for our understanding, that's adrenaline. So that gets stimulated when nerves that actually go to it. And actually, this picture shows it. Let's see. See here, you see that red thing goes down into the adrenal medulla, and that it's where it secretes. So that's where the nervous system, through the autonomic nervous system, directly secretes the adrenaline. But then the adrenaline goes into the bloodstream, and then that's what causes us the jitter, that thing, that slower response that we get when we have to like swerve out of the way or something like that. Cool. And then that brings us to the pancreas. There's a slide here with the different stresses, so that's kind of a good overview to have. But the pancreas is kind of like the calcitonin and the parathyroid hormone, where the hormones we get out of there is similar. We get the insulin, the glucagon, and the insulin and the glucagon have to do with blood sugar. So that's another molecule that we want to have, we want to have finely controlled what's in the blood sugar. In the bloodstream. And so we have a hormone that can raise up the blood sugar, and that's glucagon. And we have a hormone that will lower the blood sugar, and that's insulin. And those are both of those are made by the pancreas. The pancreas also makes a lot of hormones, a lot of glandular secretions that are exocrine function, which are the digestive hormones that get secreted, digestive enzymes that get secreted into the small intestine. So that's also the pancreas. That's the same gland. So the pancreas has both functions that we call exocrine functions, which are substances that are secreted to the outside world, and the gut in some ways is the outside world. It's not the inside of the bloodstream. It has openings through the mouth and through the other part in the butt area that go to the outside world. So technically speaking, it's an outside part of the world, and so those functions are exocrine functions, like exiting the body. And then it has these endocrine functions, endo as in inside of the body, and that's the insulin and the glucagon, which work on the blood sugar. Good. And that last one we got there, the gonads, and the gonads are basically here to secrete sex hormones, make sure we don't vanish into the infinitum and have some fun on this planet. Okay, with that, we can go right to the integumentary system. And again, if you have questions, you just shout it out. When we look at the integumentary system, the skin, we're looking at a couple of different layers. We have a few dots here. We have the top layer is the epidermis. And then underneath the epidermis, this is sort of this part here. And then underneath the epidermis, we have the dermis. The dermis. Epidermis is epithelial tissue. Dermis is connective tissue. And below that, we have the subcutaneous fat layer. The epidermis has all these different layers to it, which are great to know and to learn and to understand. But I'm not going to make you study them. All these layers, that's okay. But you want to know this is all epidermis. The thing that I think is kind of cool, if I scrape myself or something and I do bleeding, I know I cut myself through the epidermis because that epithelial tissue does not have blood supply. So that's when you know you got yourself through the dermis. And then the dermis gives the skin resistance to tearing and makes it plastic. So it has an ability to deform because it's got a whole bunch of fibers in there, collagen and elastic fibers. And it has also the way that it's arranged, it's got these papillae, dermal papilla. So these are like finger projections up. This is like three-dimensional. It's just you can't see it three-dimensional. And that increases the surface area between the dermis and the epidermis, and that helps the dermis really anchor strongly to the epidermis to the dermis. Whew, good. Skin function are numerous. We got protection. Wait a minute, that is not the skin function. That is a kid's hair is on fire. There we go. We got protection. So yeah, the top layer of the skin, the epidermis, can just kind of fall off when we bang into things and nothing happens. That's pretty good protection. The immune function, we talked about that. If things don't come into the system, if they are staying out, that's good. Boundaries make good neighbors. Fences make good neighbors, they say, right? So it's kind of that thing. So keep the things outside of the body. Temperature control, we can do sweating. That helps us bring liquid, which has a high heat capacity, and we sweating it out. That evaporates, and that brings heat from the inside of the body to the outside. We can also get blood vessels going closer to the surface, and that evaporates heat as well, which brings me to the blushing thing. So communication can also happen through the skin. So we kind of get a pale like we're fear, or we can blush. Those are communication signs. So it's kind of an interesting tool that way. And also the skin's kind of like, the epidermis is dry. And so it's keratinized. So the word keratin refers to the hormone, the protein, that makes it the skin dry and hard. So it's the thing that makes us leather, that makes the skin leather actually. And that prevents water from leaving. And so we work with the water balance that way, that it prevents water loss. And then the last one I have there is sensory function. A lot of receptors, heat receptor, touch, pain receptor, cold, a lot of them are in the skin area. And so they have a lot to do with creating a boundary between the outside world and the inside world. Or they communicate the outside world to the inside world, so to speak. And then we have skin appendages, and that's the last part of it. We have glands, we have sweat glands, and we have sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are the oil glands that go into a hair shaft, and they create sort of the natural oil that we have. And then the hair, we know about the hair. And we have nails. And so those are basically the points that I want you to remember from this chapter. All right, so that's pretty concise. Are there any questions you guys have for me at this point? Silence. Anybody there?
I have a question about this week's homework, but
yeah, go for it.
Okay. It says that we are doing brain part 1 and part 2.
Mm-hmm.
And part 1 is for this week and part 2 is for next week.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know where part 1 is or ends, basically.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point, because I kind of artificially separated it. It's in the quiz. the last question of the quiz. I think, let me see if I can make that out. I think it stops after I talk about the different lobes of the brain.
Okay.
I think it's, after I talk about the insula, I think basal ganglia, page 23 forward is then the second part. But it's in the quiz. Can you let me know if I'm wrong with that?
Sure, I can open up the quiz and see what the last question's about. And then,
Yeah, but I think I go through the lobes and then it's enough info, and then I usually stop there in the classroom at least, and then do the basal ganglia onto deeper structures afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, let me know if I'm wrong with that.
Okay.
All right, good. Anybody else got a question or a comment?
I don't have a question, but I found this review very helpful.
Which part?
Just like all of the sections we covered today.
Oh, good. You like the way that the Zoom is okay, the way we're doing it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I need feedback because, I'm just chattering along and trying to not make it too boring if I can handle it. But yeah, that's why I also make sure, if you have questions, interrupt me and don't hesitate at all. I think this format is kind of lends its way to that. Well, with that, we can keep it short. We don't have to go overboard. We can just, let me take some roll. We got Vannery here. Give me a live sign.
I'm here.
Scarlett. Koa.
Here.
Jordan.
Here.
Caitlin.
Here.
Alexis.
Here.
Berenice. Sarah.
Here.
Jamuna.
Here.
Kayla May.
Here.
And Manha.
I'm here.
Oh, Evan, right?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
It's okay, don't worry. It's all good. Thank you.
Cool. Well, good. You guys didn't even get that. Monday, they went into a whole discussion about the vaccine. You didn't even start that one. It was pretty good and heated. But we don't have to do that. But I think we covered all we need to cover today. And next week, we'll start with the nervous system. Keep up all the good work. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
If you
you.
don't have last
Thank you.
questions, I'm signing off. Have a good night.
Thank
You
you.
too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.